Hey everybody, how are you? Happy Friday afternoon. My name is Ian Hill. This is Leadership in Changing Times, the Emerging Leaders track, leading others today. How do we, you and me, mid-level leaders, how do we marshal the human capital that we're responsible for? And how do we get everybody moving in the right direction and in a direction? And how do we do that in changing times? Although we have a question about that. Someone has questioned, are we in changing times? So that'll be a good dialogue. And we're going to talk about the Leadership History Survey. So what is this? What is this thing called a coaching session? Well, basically, I'm here for you for an hour. You have me, you have my undivided attention for an hour. You ask any question that you'd like. Now, how can you ask questions? You can email your questions in beforehand, and we've had a few people that have done so. You can text in your question to 775-230-4535. It was in your reminder email. And I got an email from a director today, earlier, that said, oh, I'm supposed to I'm supposed to open these reminder emails? I thought they were just reminders. Yes, they are, and they have your handouts in them. And they have important information like where you can text in. Or you can put your question in the chat box, right? Now, Jeff, hi Jeff.
Hey there, I'm here.
Jeff is like the man from Tool Time. What was the name of that show?
Oh man. Oh yeah, Wilson.
Wilson. If you ever saw the show with, what was the name of that show?
Tim Allen, Tool Time.
Tim Allen,
yeah.
Tool Time. And there was the guy next door who you never saw. That's Jeff. He's just this out in the nebulous person out there. But he's taking all the questions. He's in the chat box along with Gina. We got Gina, the moderator, in the chat box. We've got Jeff ready to take your questions. So you can text in your question. You can to 775-230-4535. You can text in your question. You can put your question in the chat box. Or, of course, you can always go to questions@thechangingpoint.com. Questions@thechangingpoint.com. Now, here's the funny thing. All of that information was in your reminder. Open your reminder because there's information in your reminder. So some of you who just blow off the reminder, all this information is in the reminder. So you can ask your questions. Now, how does it work? You're going to ask a question. I'm going to give you my take on the question. You may agree. You may not agree. Fine. You might ask a question about your department specifically or a specific situation that you have. If you do that and you don't want me to say, well, here's what's happening in Alder Flats, Alberta, then don't say, don't use my department, don't use my name. If you want it to be anonymous. If you don't care, then don't say anything, don't make any indication. And before we go any further, I just want to say this. I want to say thank you to Durham, North Carolina, Storm Water Services. We got a wonderful box full of all kinds of cool stuff, pens and cool little giveaways and reminders about making sure that you don't pour stuff into the stormwater drains and all kinds of just great tips and ideas. Wonderful, 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 wonderful. And they sent me handy dandy water bottle. Very cool. Thank you very much. And thank you to the City of Durham's Storm Water Services. A side note, in a future session, they sent me some really cool pictures and some really cool things that they're doing. So during the 20-minute pre-roll, we're going to have a little bit of a highlight to that. How cool will that be, right? Gina's editing up a little thing to talk about some of the cool things that they're doing, and we'll run it in the pre-roll. Ian, how can we do that? How can we get some highlighting of the cool things that we're doing? Send me a gift. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. They're doing some cool things, and I'd like to share what they're doing. As I read the information that was sent to me, it was via email and in the box. It was really cool. So, all right, coaching session. I'm here. I'm answering your questions. This is a time for dialogue. We introduce a concept. We unpack a concept. We dialogue a concept. We do that live. We do that virtually. We do that on demand. We do it through text. We do it through video. Comprehensive blended learning approach. All right, with that, Jeff, I think we have a Word document there with a couple questions, right?
Yep,
so let's start with questions.
Okay, the very first question.
Very first question.
What is the difference between a leader and a supervisor?
All right, what's the difference between a leader and a supervisor? Okay, so I think the difference is, although someone might argue that this is going to sound that I'm arguing semantics. A leader doesn't necessarily have to have a title, in my opinion. A supervisor is a formal title. They are responsible for the supervision of X number of direct reports. Could be 30, could be 50, could be 100. In the Army, you have a corporal, and then you have a sergeant, and then you have a lieutenant, right? Something like that, right?
Yeah.
And so supervisor is a formal title within the hierarchy of an organization. With it comes certain roles and responsibility, obligations, and duties. Purview of leadership, purview of authority, and the like. Supervisor. Leader. A leader doesn't necessarily have to have a title. A leader can be anyone that can exert influence. Now, what's interesting is, not this week, but next Friday when we start to talk about the agent of change, we'll talk very specifically about leadership through exerting influence. You and I have all remember when we were in high school, and there was a kid in the class, and there was a teacher with a title, but that kid was running the class because they exerted influence, maybe not positive, maybe not negative, but they exerted influence. To me, leadership is about influence and the capacity to marshal human capital. What does that mean? The capacity to get people to do things. If you can get people to do things, you're a leader. And it doesn't have to necessarily be positive. You and I both know a bunch of people that we've dealt with in our professional careers that have been leaders, but not necessarily in a positive way. If I can marshal human capital, if I can get people's time, talent, treasure, if I can get their intelligence, their sweat, their creativity, if I can get that of a human being and marshal it towards a common goal, I'm a leader. A supervisor is a specific level of authority. Next question.
Okay. Does a supervisor...
This is from the same person.
Yeah, the same person.
Same person.
Does a supervisor have to be a good leader in order to be a good supervisor?
My take is yes. Because inherently, the role and responsibility that the role that I play as a supervisor and the responsibilities that come along with that would imply that one of my roles and responsibilities is to marshal human capital. Supervising is about getting people to meet a standard, or helping people to meet a standard, or checking that the standard is met, or ensuring that the policies and procedures that we've all mutually agreed to are followed, or providing the tools, the resources necessary for the person to complete their task. All of that falls under the authority and responsibility of a supervisor. Well, what does it take to do that? You better be able to lead. You better be able to marshal human capital. So do I think a supervisor needs to be able to lead? Yes. They must exhibit leadership competency. Many supervisors, especially in this sector, are vocationally proficient. They've mastered their vocation, but do they have leadership competency? That's two different things. Leadership competency, vocational competency. I think to be a highly effective supervisor, to be able to fulfill that role within the hierarchy of the leadership strategy, I've got to be able to lead people. Why? Because I've got to be able to marshal human capital. I've got to be able to help people give their best, or I've got to be able to help problem solve, or I've got to be able to take the policies and procedures and the direction of executive leaders who took their direction from elected officials, and I've got to make it happen on the ground. That's called leadership. It is a skill set. It is a series of competencies that the supervisor would deploy to fulfill their role within the hierarchy of the organization. Next.
Okay. Finally, third question.
Third question.
How can someone be a leader without being a supervisor?
Well, I already articulated that a moment ago, but I'll delve a little bit more into that. In my opinion, I think in governmental entities, you're always going to have a hierarchy. Why? Well, because you have a fiduciary responsibility, you have the public trust in your hands, and you have to have transparency that comes along with all of that. So there'll always be checks and balances and hierarchy. But attitudinally, attitudinally, I think we give less credence to titles today than ever before, at least in my lifetime. People are less likely to snap to when a title is thrown out. People are a lot more, the world has flattened quite a bit. So for the first time in the history of mankind, at least in my opinion, I can have no title and be a highly effective leader. I can have no formal designation of leadership within the hierarchical structure and yet be leading every day. I can have the ear of the director. I can have the ear of decision makers just through my capacity to get things done, let's say, or my skill set. Like, here's an example, Jeff. How many of us have ever seen an administrative assistant that's running the show? Right?
Right.
How many of us have ever dealt, and I'm not saying that's a bad thing to all of you people that are the senior administrative assistant to the director. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm just saying, how many of you have seen it? That's a prime example of an individual who has no, on the hierarchical structure, no authority, but they wield a whole bunch of authority. Do not upset the administrative assistant who's the senior administrative assistant to the director. Do not do that. Your stuff will be at the bottom of the pile every day. Your stuff will never get to the top of the pile. Facetious example? Perhaps, but I think you know my point. Now let's look at the other side. We all know a long-term, vocationally competent, maybe they've mastered their vocation, individual who exerts influence because they are trusted, because they are respected, because they on a daily basis know exactly what they're doing and doing extremely well. They're willing to help others, and they've built that network of trusting relationships that when they stand up and talk, everybody pays attention, including positions of authority. How did they do that? By a title? No. They did that by executing the basic principles of leadership. Now what's funny is, and the great thing about these questions is, that's what we're going to talk about for the next 14 weeks, or 12 weeks, I guess, 11 weeks, whatever it is. This first 3 weeks, guys, was about looking within yourself. Are you a leader? And if so, then what kind of leadership approaches do you utilize? And did your leadership approaches organically grow up and kind of just take hold? Or did you intentionally develop them? And if you intentionally develop them, are the ones that you develop what the times require? We had another question that came in that said, well, I'm not exactly sure you've made a good enough case that things have changed. I'm not exactly sure if you've made a good enough case that times are different. Well, okay, well, that could be. And how are things different within our industry? Well, frankly, the idea that people are being laid off regularly in departments across the country, or people's wages have been frozen for a significant period of time. Now, that's not every department, but in many. The idea that that within our broader society, that people question public institutions, I think more intensely than I've seen. The economic pressures, the social pressures, the social ills, let alone technology. I think any reasonable person would look and say that society is different than it was just 10 to 15 short years ago. Everything from the mobile phone that used to be a brick, and then before that there wasn't one, to the capacity of us to interact around the world, to the family unit, to the diversity of our communities, to the socioeconomic challenges, to the social ills, to the education, to the like. All of the cumulative effect of that, I would suggest, says, wow, things are a little bit different than they were before. And how does all of that impact the people that I'm responsible for leading? And can I lead them the way that I have before? Now, you might come to the conclusion and say, yes, I can. I can use the exact same leadership approaches that I've used in the past. Okay, cool. That's awesome. Go. Run. I know for me, I look at it and say, probably not. There's 5 generations in the workplace. It's more diverse than it's ever been. And not just color of skin. You know, my skin is brown. Not just color of skin. but diversity from everything from life experience, worldview, age, all kinds of stuff. So from my standpoint, I think we are in a different time that we were in a few short years ago, which then would beg the question, can I lead exactly the same? Will I get the same results if I use the same techniques as I fulfill my role as supervisor? Can I use the same strategies and approaches? I think the answer just on the surface, logically, at minimum it would be this, Jeff, maybe not. At minimum it would be maybe not. Yeah. At maximum it would be no. Well, if the answer is anywhere from maybe not to no, then I've got to do an exploration of, okay, what would be the leadership approaches that times require? And that's what we talk about starting next Friday. So this first 3 weeks is just introspection. Introspection. Okay, if Ian's right and times have changed, and anecdotally and probably statistically and factually, he could probably take 3.5 days to prove it. Or I could just look around society and say, yeah, he's probably right, things have changed. Then we forced you, or we were challenging you to look within yourself. Like that leadership history survey that I gave you at the beginning of the week. Did you take it? Did you actually answer the questions? Or at minimum, did you think through the questions? Because on Monday, I'm going to give you another exercise that your directors took this week, where it's going to ask you some very basic questions and try to establish your leadership style. So 2 exercises. Where did I come from? And who are the influences that I have that help me grab to develop the leadership style that I have now? And then, what is that leadership style? And what are some key indicators to it? So on Monday morning, you're going to get an exercise, and so will your employees, the frontline employees. So the directors got it this week. You're going to get it this week, this Monday. They got it this past Monday. You'll get it this coming Monday. And the whole point is to create a dialogue amongst all of you. How do I do things? Now, there'll be funny words attached. Nurturer, energizer, researcher, and the like. Just like you've taken those personality surveys before. Shark, monkey, muskrat. No one's a muskrat. Or whatever, colors, blue, red, green. So it's just one of those kind of things. And there's a ton of them. I like this one because it's quick, that you'll take on Monday. But the point of the exercise is to better understand yourself. Oh, that's true about me. And then hopefully ask the next question, which is, what are you? Oh, I didn't know that about you. And they'll say, what are you? And I'll say, I'm a this. And hopefully through greater understanding, we gain alignment. Alignment. Ultimately, to be able to marshal human capital, I have to be able to gain alignment of thought, alignment of energy, alignment of activity. The deeper the alignment, the greater efficiency. The deeper the alignment, the greater likelihood of success. As we are fractionalized and dysfunctional, the greater the dysfunctionality, the less likelihood of success, i.e. Washington, D.C. No, just kidding. Just an observation. Anyways, leadership history survey. Now don't forget, if you don't agree with what I'm saying, just throw it in the chat box. That's anonymous. If you want to ask a question, then text it in. Or if you want to send in an email, then you can just go to questions@thechangingpoint.com. Text 775-230-4535. Either way. Leadership history survey. I want to review that really, really quickly. I want to review the leadership history survey. And before I do that, I just want to position it. This program, this 15 weeks, is not about vocational competency. The assumption is you're vocationally competent. What do you mean, vocational competency? That whether you work in stormwater, Durham Stormwater Services, keep plugging that, whether you work in stormwater services, or whether you work in engineering, or where you work on the administrative side, or whether you drive a plow. And great job to all of you in Kansas, all of the departments that are helping us in Kansas or participating in Kansas. Thank you for all that you did in these past 2 storms in your communities. Wonderful. High level of professionalism, protecting the safety of the public. Well done. So whatever your task is, I'm assuming you're vocationally competent at a high level, proficiency or mastery, because you wouldn't be a supervisor, I would assume. But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about, do you know how to get people to do something? Do you know how to get the best from a human being? Do you know how to enforce policies and procedures? Do you know how to correct performance? Do you know how to motivate? Do you know how to delegate? Do you know how to organize your own time? All of those key competencies of an effective supervisor, mid-level leader, manager, whatever. Do you know how to do that? No one's questioning whether you're vocationally competent. Leadership competency. And then as I made the case a moment ago, there's a comma to that. And do you know how to do all that today? That's the kicker. So it's not enough to know how to do all that. The world changed, swang, and now I got to be able to do all that today. Okay, with all that as background, the Leadership History Survey. The point of the exercise was to get you to think, how did I become who I am? Why is that important? Why are there some people you relate to really, really well, and there's other people you don't relate to at all? Why are there some people that when they talk you get excited, and other people that one word comes out of their mouth and you're like, eh, even though they've never done anything to you? Probably because of life experience. Probably because of this good, bad, right, wrong, because of something you went through. Why is it that you like to work alone? Or why is it you like to work with a team? Why is it when given a task, if it has no end, it like drives you crazy? Or why is it that when there's a short-term deadline, you freak out? I would suggest to you these Leadership History Survey questions help you better understand. Now, there's no right or wrong to this. It is not a mathematical equation. No right or wrong. It is just observation. Maybe with a kicker question that says, and are those things serving me well? Here's an example. In number 10, and we won't go through all of them, but in question number 10, it asks you, who's your worst boss and why? The purpose of that question is to get you to think of the qualities and attributes that you will just not tolerate. You see, your worst boss helps me and should help you to understand what you will not tolerate. My worst boss. The problem with that is that anytime somebody exhibits some of the qualities of your worst boss, do you completely discount them? Do you completely cut them out? Do you just turn them off? Because if you do that, you might be missing the boat. They're not your worst boss. And yet when they exhibit a quality, you might say, I fundamentally reject. But that might be to your demise. Or that might, at minimum, be to your regret. You could have gained something or learned something. Okay, how about on the other side? Question number 9. Question number 9 was about your best boss. Who's your best boss that you've ever had, and what were the qualities that they exhibited? I want to unpack this for just a moment. A little bit deeper than I did question number 10. The funny thing about that is, when you tell me the answer, if you were to sit down over a beer, a soda, whatever, water, Durham, stormwater services, if you were to sit down over and you explained to me, you said, yeah, my best boss was so-and-so, and because they did such and such and so-and-so and such and such and so-and-so, I'd be taking notes. You know why? You just told me what you expect from a leader. You just clarified with me in literally 5 seconds exactly what your expectation is of how you want to be led. Because you told me what the gold standard was. Here's my best boss, here's what they did, here's how they acted, and here's why I thought they're so great. Well, if I'm leading you, I better do that. Because every time I don't do that, then I'm not meeting your standard of what you've said is excellence when it comes to leadership. Here's the challenge, though, with that. That might not serve you well. Huh? Well, it might not. Let's say I'm never going to be your best boss, and yet I'm still your boss. Is there anything you can gain from me? Is there anything you can learn from me? Is there anything you can take from me? Or are you just going to discount me because I'm not living up to your best boss? The point of both of those questions is to help you clarify what you expect and what you will not tolerate. One more thing on the best boss piece. Challenge you to do something. Challenge you to do something in the next 7 days, okay? You wrote, hopefully, or you thought at minimum about question number 9. And somebody's name came to your mind. Somebody. Somebody popped up. Yeah, who was my best boss? Oh, Barbara. Barbara was my best. Yeah, Barbara was great. You know, Barbara made a significant impact in my life. And now that I think about it, so much of what I do is patterned off of Barbara because Barbara was so great. Or John. John was awesome. And because of the difference that John made in my life, I find that I've patterned myself after John. Huh. Wow. And for some of you, it's a passing thought. But I would ask you to take that passing thought and do something with it. I would ask you to take that passing thought and contact that person. What? Yeah, if they're still with us on the planet, if they're still with us, I would challenge you to track that person down. I would challenge you to call them. Now, in some of you, you'll be able to walk down the hallway because they're in your life still today. Whatever the case may be, I challenge you to go and reach out to that person. I challenge you to call them. Don't email them. Call them. And if you can physically see them, go see them. Well, I don't know where they are. Get on the University of Google or Yahoo or whatever it is, your search engine, and track them down. Go find them and call them. Bring, bring. Hello, 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 hey, hey. Well, I haven't heard from you in years. I know. Been busy. I'm sure you have too. I'm going through this leadership program, and I was asked to identify who my best boss was. Well, I know that's not me. Well, actually, it is you. I've been in the game for a while now, and you were my best boss. And you cared for me, and you taught me, and you grew me, and you expected things of me that I didn't think I could give, and you always wanted the best for me. And I'm a reflection of you, and I thank you for that. So I just called to tell you thank you. And you might even say, I just called to tell you I love you because you made a difference in my life. There will absolutely be silence on the other end of the phone. And then you'll hear this. Are you drunk? Are you drunk? Now that part probably won't happen. But you will hear silence. And they may try to push it off and, kind of laugh it off. Or I know in many situations, as professionals have told me that they've made that phone call, there was tears. You know what's funny? And this is going to be harsh, so I'll preface it by saying that. You're a sorry excuse for a human being if you don't try to make that phone call. What? You, I think, would agree with me if you made the phone call, you'd make someone's day. You might make their week. You might make their month. You might make their year. You might even change their life. Well, you're a pretty sorry excuse for a human being if you don't give that gift to someone else. They made a difference in your life. They made an extreme, significant difference in your life. They were your best boss. But you don't make the phone call? Yeah, well, Ian, that's just some kind of mamby-pamby self-help crap. Well, there's also another reason for doing it. Because 5 years from now, 6 years from now, 2 years from now, a month from now, or perhaps 10 years from now, somebody's going to ask your people, who's your best boss? Who's your worst boss? And you're going to fall somewhere in there. The point of the exercise is to show gratitude, absolutely. I think to be a great leader today, you have to have some humility on you. You have to acknowledge that other people made a difference in your life. Then you need to be proactive in lightening the burden of your fellow man or enhancing someone's life by making the phone call. So gratitude is about humility, understanding that somebody else helped me, but gratitude is also about giving a gift. I think leaders understand that today. But it's also hopefully more profound than that. It hopefully makes you look within yourself and say, holy crap, I have other people's lives in my hands. And the way that I act, and the way that I talk, and the way that I roll my eyes in a meeting or make a flippant comment can affect things. And my lack of organization or my lack of focus or my lack of getting things done in a timely manner can affect things. Conversely, the way I treat people with dignity and respect, my kindness, my collaborative spirit, my willingness to take input, my highly organized nature, my clarity of outcomes, providing the tools to the people around me, can also impact somebody's life. So that's the beauty of being a mid-level leader. I have people that I can help on a daily basis make it through their life in a more efficient, more effective, and hopefully nicer journey. That doesn't mean that you're not going to have difficulties and challenges. It just means you have the chance to be somebody's best boss. And why not try? So that's the point of a seemingly self-help trite exercise. It's about You looking introspectively and realizing that that you can make a significant impact. Now, there's some other questions that I'd like to highlight. I don't want to go through all 12. I want you to look at question number 11, and then we'll jump to the front. Question number 11 basically is about mentors, identifying mentors who have influenced you and that have changed you as a result. Now, that was to do two things. Again, it's about identifying the people that made a significant difference, but it's also about identifying style, because that tells me and should tell you what style you fit best with. So if there was a consistency amongst the mentors you had, formal and an informal, and a consistency in their style, that might tell you a little bit about you and the styles that you connect with the best. And then, of course, you ask the same question. Does that serve me well? Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. So the question number 11 isn't just about identifying those individuals, but it's also about identifying their style. And what style do you utilize, and what style do you work best with? To the point where you could go to your manager or your boss and say, here's how I do best. Communicate with me in these ways. Well, Ian, they're going to reject that. Remember, I'm preaching the same message to them. So just like I'm talking to you about your communication style and things like that, or I will be in the coming weeks, to your people, they're hearing the same message. And they have a greater accountability because they're on a senior level of leadership. They should be more skilled at leading. So, question number 11. Question number 1, 2, and 3 had to do with family and had to do with brothers, sisters, and had to do with where you grew up. Why? Because all of that had an impact. Like an example might be, if you grew up in a formal setting where you didn't just pop by somebody's house, I bet you're uncomfortable when people just pop into your office like, what are you doing here? If you grew up in a rural setting or in a more relaxed setting where people just drop by all the time, that was the normal way, then you probably have no problem just walking into somebody's office and sitting down. And you would assume that people would do that with you as well. I would suggest to you that these things, the first 3 questions, really give me some insight into my preferred approach to communication, to even meetings. How about that one about games and sports? In that one about games and sports, did you just compete by yourself? Do you just like doing it your way? There's nothing wrong with that, except as the problems of our lives become more complex and more multifaceted, we probably need a more collaborative spirit to get things done. Or did you love the team environment? Did you thrive in that collegiality of doing it together? We love it, team. And are you stuck in a job where there's not much team? Or how about this? Did you not like it at all? You didn't like to do it by yourself, and you didn't like to do it with anybody else. You just had some bad experiences. So when your leader, whoever it might be, starts popping off some Vince Lombardi quotes and starts, anecdotally referring to athletic metaphors, do you just shut it off? None of that is good or bad, right or wrong. But is it serving you well? So, hopefully you went through the leadership history survey and you started saying to yourself, yeah, well, maybe that's why the hair goes up on the back of my neck when she starts talking. Or maybe that's why I get a little tense when he starts talking. I shouldn't, I guess, on the surface, have any feelings towards them, good or bad, right or wrong, but man, they just put me off. Well, I think that by doing this exploration, we start to get a little bit more of a higher emotional IQ and realize that those emotions, those perspectives that don't serve me well, I want to eliminate. And then in question number 9 and 10, I clearly understand what I expect and I clearly understand what I will not tolerate, and does that serve me well? And finally, will you make that phone call? Will you make the phone call? Will you dial up someone that made a significant difference in your life and tell them so? Brightening their day or maybe even changing their life. Okay, that's the leadership history survey. Now, you can ask Jeff a question. I got to tell you now, the directors last week, they were asking questions, right?
Yep.
Maybe they're just not as sharp as the mid-level leaders. No, I don't know. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. So ask a question. You can ask a question in the chat. What do you think of this thing? What did you take from the leadership history survey? What insight did you gain? Or what was your takeaway? You can post it in the chat box. You can post it in the, you can ask it via text, or you can send in the question. And if you don't know the phone number, that's why you got to open up the reminder email. But it's 775-230-4535. And in the future, we should have that. We'll put that down at the bottom. 775-230-4535. And you can ask your question. Okay. Now, we also talked about the change continuum. The change continuum. Do you have a process for change? Do you have a sequential process that you can utilize when you want to change something? Why is that so important? Well, I think the number one tool you can have in your toolkit today as a professional is the capacity to change. The world is ever changing around us. Jeff made an excellent point earlier. He said, well, Ian, it's not just today. Ever since Gutenberg, for hundreds of years, we've been experiencing profound change. Repeatedly, generation after generation, a consistent generational profound change where the generation before was better than the generation, or the generation later was better than the generation before.
Right.
And whether that's the outhouse, or whether that's tuberculosis,
Right.
you know, the iron lung, or whether that's my iPhone, equal time, my Galaxy 3. Got to make sure we don't, right? Equal time, that's right. I think Jeff's point was that we've always experienced profound change. So do you know how to change? Can you look at a new skill and assimilate it? Can you have a deficiency pointed out to you and rectify it? Do you know how to do that? And if I was to ask you how you change, could you explain it to me? Could you walk me through? Well, first thing I do, Ian, is I go and read a little bit more about it, and then I take some keywords and put them on sticky notes and put them all over my house. And I put them on my steering wheel so I remember. And then I tell my spouse or my significant other that I want to change so they can hold me accountable. And then I write up a plan. I take that plan and I put it on paper, and then I put those dates in the calendar that I'm trying to hit. That's how I change. Oh, wow, that's pretty good. You got a plan. Others of you would just say this, I don't know. If I know I need to change something, I just kind of work at it. Just put it in time. Well, how effective is that? Well, probably not so much. Okay, well, there you go. Because 80% of our behavior is unconscious. So here's the point. If we are leaders, and you are, whether you have a title or not, if you buy the premise that things are changing, have changed, are changing, and will continue, as Jeff pointed out with the example of Gutenberg, will continue to change, then I must ask myself as a leader, am I exhibiting the qualities the times require? If the answer is no, or maybe not, then I've got to change. But oftentimes people don't. Why? Because they don't know how to change. They don't know how to say, okay, here's a skill I need to acquire, and then acquire it, because we've never been taught that. Now, the life has taught us that. Life's taught us that when the spouse walks in and says, I'm leaving if you don't change. Ah! And then you scramble to figure out a way. So the whole point of sharing that change continuum with you, the whole point of that was to say, here's a process for changing. Here's a sequential steps that you could take if you run to really change something that would give you or increase your chances for changing. Give you a fighting chance. That was the point of that. Well, I don't like that. Okay, well, I'm okay if you don't like it, but do you have a process? And the reason that you want to put words to it, and the reason that you want to lay it out sequentially, is so you can teach it. See, that's one of the important roles of a mid-level leader, is to teach, to equip. So it's not just enough that you're really good at something. You're not judged on your performance as a mid-level leader. You're judged on the performance of others. Your job is to help others perform well and meet and exceed standards. So that's the reason for having you. So a part of that is teaching. Well, I can't teach something that I don't have words to, and I can't teach something that isn't sequential. That change continuum is going to be incredibly important in a very short period of time, because starting next Friday, I'm going to ask you what you're going to change. What? Yeah, I'm going to ask you in a very formal and very direct way, what are you going to work on for the next 12 weeks or 11 weeks or 10 weeks? What's the one thing you're going to get better at? So this isn't some joke. What do you mean? Well, this isn't some self-help gig. Everybody involved is going to pick out something. They're going to write down what it is. They're going to come up with a plan for doing it, and then they're going to execute the plan, and they're going to get better at it. Everybody's going to pick out one thing. Your director's going to pick out one thing. You're going to pick out one thing. The front line's going to pick out one thing. Everybody's going to pick out one thing. That's unreasonable. We're too busy for that. You're too busy to get better at one thing? Really? Really? Can you imagine the cumulative effect of a department of 100 people, everybody picking out one thing and working at getting better at it for 11 or 12 weeks and then being better at it? A minimum of one thing. They might pick out more than one thing. But can you imagine if 100 people at all levels of the organization picked out one thing and tried to work at being better at it? You and I both know the cumulative effect of that would be a better department. And if you don't believe that to be true, then talk to the departments that have gone through the program before and have done it. So very quickly here, this is going to get real tangible. Because I'm going to ask you whether you fill out the piece of paper like somebody already did this morning, filled out their commitment and sent it to me. So you do it the manual way where you fill it out and scan it in and send it. Or whether you do it through the online that you'll be able to do by clicking a button, filling out the form. You'll get an email of that commitment and I will. Either way you use it, you're going to be asked to make a commitment. And, by the way, I hate to say this, but at the end, there's a report, and we'll see who made the commitments and who didn't. Right? You're putting time and energy in. We're putting time and energy in. We're spending taxpayers' resources. We've got to be able to show that performance improved. Well, that's because of you, Ian. If you're not a good teacher, Ian, then performance might not improve. Really? It's not on me. Because you're going to develop your own plan for improvement, and it might not have anything to do with me. Right? I'm just asking the question. Is there one thing that you could get better at? Is there one thing that if you got better at it, your spouse's life would be better? Is there one thing that you could get better at, your employees' lives would be better? If there's one thing, if you got better at it, your supervisor, your boss's life would be easier or better. What's the one thing? So this whole program, the whole thing is relevant and meaningful because everybody's going to pick out one thing and be better at it. Well, what should my one thing be? I have no idea. I have no idea. I don't work with you every day. How do I know what your one thing should be? But I'll give you some tools in the coming weeks to be able to, if you don't know what it should be, to help you identify. You're going to send out a survey to all your employees. You're going to send out a survey and you're going to ask them, how am I doing? You should be getting a survey from your directors. See, that's called accountability. I just told all of you what I told them. They're supposed to be sending out a survey to you, asking you how they're doing, and letting you give feedback on their performance. And then you're going to send out a survey to all the people you're responsible for to give you feedback about how you're doing. Why? So that we can help understand what our one thing should be. And then we listen to that feedback, we listen to it, we look introspectively, we talk to our peers, and we pick out one thing. And then we work at doing it. And then we get better at it by the end. Now, obviously, the reason for doing that is if the cumulative effect of everybody individually getting better would be a better department. But also, there's an underlying thing that I hope that we're teaching through that exercise. How to change. How to change. In difficult economic times, in times of trepidation and worry, there's not safety and security in things staying the same. There's safety and security in the capacity to change, to adapt, to overcome. So in a simple couple of week exercise of you picking out something and trying to change it, and you do, you've now begun to master the skill of changing, which will serve you well. It'll sit well in your toolkit because you can bring that out at any time. Somebody sent me an email today with their commitment. And their commitment didn't have anything to do with work. Their commitment was their well-being and their health. Well-being and their health. They had made a commitment to improve their well-being and their health. So your commitment might be that, or your commitment might be better delegation or better communication with employees or being more organized or learning how to deal with difficult employees. I don't know what your commitment will be. Could be at home, could be in the workplace. Could be within yourself introspectively. I don't care. But everyone's going to make one. Well, how are you going to make me do that? Well, I can't compel you. But I have a couple levers. The first lever is just me sending you notes saying, I didn't get your commitment. Where's your commitment? How about your commitment? But there is a report at the end. Now, I will not share your commitment with any human being. My staff doesn't even look at the commitments. I do, and I read every one of them. Really? You read like 1,700, 1,800, 2,000 commitments? Yeah, it takes a long time. And I try to respond to every one. Hey, good commitment, or how you doing, or whatever. And then once you've made your commitment, we'll check in with you. How's it coming? How's it coming? How's it coming? And then at the end, we do run a report, and we give it. We don't say what the commitment is, but we do run a report. We give it to the director and say, or whoever's in charge, and say, here you go. Here's who participated. Here's how many emails they opened. Here's how many videos they watched. And here's how many of the exercises that we asked them to turn in, they turned in. That's pretty simple, right, Jeff?
Yep.
And Jeff is the one that created the report. And so, it's a snapshot. And then we give a certificate. And if the department wants to hand out the certificates, they do. Well, I didn't know it was going to be all that. Well, what did you think it was going to be? Just 5 pep talks? Come on, man. All right. So that pulls back the veil a little bit of why that change continuum is important, because you're going to be asked to pick out one thing and change. But I'm not going to tell you what the one thing is. You are. Or you're going to ask your people that you lead what the one thing should be, which would mean it's probably valid. Probably valid. Okay. Ask your question, because if I don't get a question in 5 minutes, we're done, right? Because if no one's going to ask any questions, what am I rambling on about? So you want to come prepared with questions. And it could be a question in your workplace, could be a question of people you supervise. Well, I don't want it to be known. I want it to be anonymous. Then you just text it in, or you email it in and put anonymous. Well, I'm sitting in a group right now, Ian. Well, pull out your phone and text something, and when they ask you what the hell you're doing, you say, I'm texting my wife, or whatever. No one has to know. That's why if you want to ask me something sensitive, the best thing to do is send in the email before. Send in the email before. Now, there was another question that I wanted to make sure that we got to. And I'm going to position it in such a way that you won't know what department it came from. Hopefully. What do I do when I have a direct report that's rude? That doesn't say please, doesn't say thank you, that is gruff, curt, and short with people. And the way they're acting is a reflection on me and the rest of us. And we got to get that to stop. What do we do, Ian? That was basically the question. There was a lot more detail to it. And the person that asked that question, I'll send you some specific thoughts via email of how I would deal with that in your specific situation. But the general question that would apply to all of us is, what happens when I, as a mid-level leader, have a supervisor who's just mean and rude and curt and short and gruff? Well, a couple things. First of all, are they vocationally competent? Do they have some redeeming values and qualities that their employees admire and respect? That's the first evaluation. Because if they do, then maybe the employees, not that it's acceptable, but maybe the employees have tolerated that. And they're okay with it because there's a bunch of other stuff that individual does. I'm not saying you shouldn't deal with it. I'm just saying you got to know what the situation is. Or has it become toxic? If it's become toxic, then all of us have protocols within our organization of how to address that with our director, with our human resources department, and the like. But let's say it hasn't gotten toxic yet. It's pre-toxic, right? You're doing preventative maintenance so it doesn't get toxic. Well, then the next question I ask myself is, what kind of a relationship do I have with them? Do I have a strong enough relationship that I can be direct? I can just say, look, Bob, you are gruff, man. You are rough with these people. You can't do that. There's got to be some kindness, subtleties in today's day and age, man. You can't just fire off emails that don't say anything except exactly what you want. No salutation, no ending, no thank you, no hello, no nothing. You just fire off information, and then at the bottom you say, and I expect an answer in a day. Because a guy can work 8 hours for you, or a guy can work 8 hours against you, Bob. So your demeanor is important. If I have the kind of relationship and trust with them that I can have that conversation, I will. But let's say it's not. Let's say there's not that trust there. Then I've got to work to get that trust there for the long term. But in the near term, I do think it is important to intervene. I do think it's important to have a casual conversation. I do think it's important to maybe read the email to them and with them. Now, I would diffuse that, and I would go in. I would go in very humbly to ensure that I don't create a mess, and I would have to diffuse the mess. I'm going to go in very humbly and very quietly and just say, "How you doing? Are you all right?" "Yeah, I'm fine. What's the problem?" "Well, I'm just noticing that in this instance, and this instance, these things happened. And I want to make sure that you're good and that something's not wrong with you and I, or just something's not wrong here." It gives them the benefit of the doubt. Then I'm going to give them very specific examples of the behavior that I'm concerned with. And then I'm going to give them very specific ways that I'd like to see it in the future. Now, I'm answering the question because out of respect, because you asked me a question. In Agent of Change, the first 2 weeks, 3 weeks actually, the whole 3 weeks, we're going to talk about poor performing employees and how to coach poor performing employees. And I literally am going to give you a schematic, a step-by-step schematic of how to coach poor performers. So I don't want to go all the way into the depth of that, but the basics that I gave you, I will support with an approach, with a definite approach to coaching poor performance before it moves into progressive discipline. How do we stop it from getting into formal progressive discipline? So to the emailer that sent me that email, I'll answer more of your specifics. But generally speaking, how do I deal with someone who's curt, short, and angry? Or curt, short, and burned out? Or curt, short, and crusty? I've got to ask some clarifying questions before I implement my strategy. And then when I implement my strategy, it's going to be based on respect, trust, clarity of expectation, and then clarity of follow-through of celebration or consequence. All of that I just described will lay out literally for 3 weeks in very, very detailed and tangible form, so you can put those tools in your toolkit to know what you do with that. All right, Jeff, you got anything?
I don't have anything here.
Okay, so
Nope.
no questions. Seeing no questions. Hearing no questions. I'm not going to waste your time, and I'm not going to waste my time, okay? But do me a favor. Do me a favor. Come to these things with questions. Come to these things with thoughts. Come to these things with challenges. You know, if you don't agree with what I'm saying, then throw something up there. You know what I mean? We'll track you down. I mean, we'll be happy to. I'm just kidding. We'll be happy to take them and talk it out. That's what the point of this is. We introduce the information in the teaching. We unpack the information. We dialogue the information. We continue to unpack the information. That whole process should enhance the opportunity for you to learn. And when has learning occurred? When behavior has changed. All right. You're a mid-level leader, which means you're important and critical. The work that you do is important and critical. You touch thousands of citizens, every citizen from cradle to grave. And organizations can't be effective unless you are great. You are great. Great director, wonderful, great frontline. But you know what? At the end of the day, mid-level leaders have to be great to have a great organization. I thank you for your hard work and energy. We'll talk to you on Monday. Don't forget, you're going to get that leadership style inventory, another exercise to help you look introspectively within yourself and know your style. And when you do it, ask your directors or ask your supervisors, because they took it last week. Your front line will also be taking it this Monday as well. So it should create a dialogue amongst all of you. What am I and what are you? And let's talk about what it could mean. Okay? So look for that on Monday morning. Have a great weekend. Take care, everybody.